with our weekly segment of Secret Societies with Warhamster Brady. And how are you, Warhamster?
I'm doing okay. As you can hear from my voice, I got a little bit of a sore throat, but I think we'll be able to get through this. And if I get hoarse,
just cut it off if you need to, wherever you want to.
Doing a little bit better today. I had to cancel a show yesterday. There was no way I could have done it, but we'll get there.
Cool. All right. Well, I'm going to follow your lead. Take us where you want to go.
Okay, we got some fun stuff today. Given the big view, what we've been talking about is the secret societies. They put their people in the halls of power throughout the government, academia, military, the State Department, you name it, all over the business world. And they just seem to, all the same people know each other and they marry each other. We're not the only people who ever noticed that. And I want to start this with a 3-minute video of a speech that JFK gave just weeks before he was assassinated. And there are some people out there that think this is the speech that got him killed.
Yeah, I've heard this. This is awesome. Let's go.
Yeah. All right, make sure the sound is working.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society.
You can hear that okay?
Yes.
Okay.
And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence.
He basically says it right there. He's describing Skull and Bones.
On infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day.
And now he's just describing Operation Gladio.
Yes. That is it. Go ahead.
Yep, I knew you were going to love that.
It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations.
Oh, just like we've been talking about for the last 2 months.
So he just described everything: the international syndicate, Operation Gladio, the secret societies behind all of it, everything.
Yep. I mean, there's no mistaking it. We could have written that. Could have written that exact speech.
And what's funny is I'm going to be interviewed. We're doing a 15-minute clip, and I already had that speech up. It's like we're mind melded here, Brady. You should be very scared because I had already clipped that just in the words, not the video, to start the whole conversation tonight about the guerrillas. So go ahead. I love this.
Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned. No rumor is printed. No secret is revealed.
Little DOGE reference there.
No president should fear public scrutiny of his program, for from that scrutiny comes understanding, and from that understanding comes support or opposition, and both are necessary. I am not asking your newspapers to support an administration, but I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people. For I have complete confidence in the response and dedication of our citizens whenever they are fully informed. I not only could not stifle controversy among your readers, I welcome it. This administration intends to be candid about its errors. For as a wise man once said, an error doesn't become a mistake until you refuse to correct it.
The report is that the president is dead.
Yeah, it's totally amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's only, what, 61 years ago? Oh,
And
yeah.
we still don't have the truth.
It's kind of, well, a lot of people telling it now. But, the whole thing with the USAID, you and I know it's just the tip of the iceberg, but the amount of people that have woken up to the corruption just in the last month, it's just, it's an amazing time to be alive.
It is. And of course, then, we both know that the more, not dollar wise, but the most significant revelation is tucked in National Endowment for Democracy, not USAID.
Yeah, every single one of these departments, this is systemic corruption. It is, and it's been going on a long time. I remember being a very young hamster and sitting down at the table with my parents and I'd started to figure things out. I called it a bribocracy. I go, there's bribes everywhere. That's how this whole system works. And, took them 20 years to come to see it my way, but they did eventually. So I think it's great that people are waking up. So here's another fun thing that happened this week is I'm sitting here minding my own business and I get a text from the colonel. And she says she found a certain guy while she's looking up Tucker's dad in the Pilgrim Society. And it is a bonesman that I had skipped over. So I think it might make sense for us to talk about Mr. Chauncy Depew.
What else did you find on him?
I just read what you sent. I didn't do any more digging. So if you want to take this one away, go for it.
All right, hold on. Let me pull him back up.
I really want to hit on him here because of one of the things that he was involved in, and we've talked about a lot of the bonesmen been involved in the railroad, and I want to make a commentary on why that's so important.
So, yeah, exactly. All right, so basically, he was born in 1834. He died in 1928. So, he was very, very old. And he was an attorney, a businessman, and a member of the Republican Party. He served 2 terms as a U.S. Senator from New York. And his primary, benefactor, if you will, was Cornelius Vanderbilt. And if you guys recall, the show that we did about the Vanderbilts and how they were kind of wrapped into the old money, they intermarried with the royalty in Europe in order to basically cement the fact that they were the U.S. royalty. And so and of course, they were involved in everything. He served as an attorney and the president of the New York Central Railroad System. Now, this is huge because remember what we were telling you about Buffalo. Buffalo housed some of the most richest families in the entire United States. They were connected to New York City and the rest of the world, like Cleveland, Cincinnati, by railroads. Railroads were they were as important during this time as aircraft is today in getting people around as far as commerce. They control everything. When you control the railroad, you controlled everything. What did you want to say about it?
Yeah, let's talk about the railroads a bit. one of the things that got America into the system, into the situation we're in now, where we basically have these multinational corporations own our politicians, and they're basically, the whole thing about how they're, spreading, soft power throughout the world with all these, Gladio type events. That it all stems from what's called the mercantilist system. And Hamilton, we fought a Revolutionary War to get away from the mercantilist system. So what is a mercantilist system? Well, it came about in the 1600s in England, and the Netherlands really started it. It's where the businessmen, the merchant class, the businessmen, multinational corporations like the British East India Company, they get benefits from being close to the government. Those who have the government's ear get the perks. So Hamilton would argue after we got away from the mercantilist system, which is like all the tax T and tax acts, they were basically designed to favor the British East India Company. Hamilton argues for a similar system in America. That's not what the Constitution said, but Hamilton tried to implement it anyway. And what he always argued for is what they call protective tariffs and internal improvements. And that's code word for basically boondoggles, handouts to the favorite people. And we had the building of canals was huge business in the founding of our country up through the early 1800s. Then it becomes the railroads. And the railroad lawyers were some of the biggest dirtbags that ever lived. First of all, they want to get a railroad through, they got to evict people off their land. And that was very dirty. They would negotiate with, city councils or mayors, because if you're a town where the railroad's going through, you stand to become very profitable. If the railroad doesn't misses your town, you're not going to be as wealthy. That's why you see the Intercontinental Railroad, which is a lot of what this was the 1860 election was all about, was this new Republican Party wanted to get their handouts. And if you look at the Intercontinental Railroad, it's zigzag all over the place from town to town. It didn't go straight. And that was because of bribes. And yes, Lincoln was a railroad lawyer, and he was just as dirty as all the others. They built some private citizens built another intercontinental railroad from I want to say it was Minneapolis to Seattle, and it was built at half the cost and half the time. So that's how your government efficiency. But these fortunes were made on these government handouts. This is the one-party rule of the Republican Party from the 1860 onwards for the next 4 decades. That's how the robber barons came about. And this guy's a railroad lawyer. He was part of it.
So also, we covered, just in Operation Gladio, I came across the Pilgrim Society, but one of the people that follow me on X is the one that brought Tucker's dad being in the Pilgrim Society to my attention, and I apologize for not remembering who exactly that was to give them the credit for that. But just to finish up on Depew, he also was a descendant from the French Huguenot family. He was from Peekskill, New York. His mother descended from a Sherman that was who was the brother of the American founding father, Roger Sherman, and also Reverend Charles Chauncy, who was the second president of Harvard. So he was very, very well connected.
Yeah, so Roger Sherman is not just a founding father. He's the only person to sign all 4 of the great state papers of the U.S. That'd be the Continental Association, the Declaration of Independence, the Articles of Confederation, and the Constitution. He was there for all 4.
And this guy is a relative of his.
Yeah. He also signed the 1774 petition to the king, which was really led to, a lot of that led to the revolution. It was an early declaration. It wasn't a declaration of independence. It was kind of a warning letter that please stop doing this stuff because people are ticked off, is what that said.
So he also was appointed as the United States minister to Japan back in the day. A whole lot more with the railroad, all different kinds of railroads. To Chicago, to, like I said, Cleveland, St. Louis, all of those. So he was very much involved in all of that. But I did want to mention, since some of the people may not have gotten the Pilgrim Society piece, just since we mentioned it, I just want to put this in context. So you guys that have followed me in Operation Gladio understand the Fabian Society in the late 1800s and how they play into the formation of eventually the fascist international Operation Gladio. The Pilgrim Society was just after the turn of the century, to 1902. So it precedes all of the other things that are like notoriously associated with this backroom deal thing, like the CFR and those. The Pilgrim Society consisted of two audiences, the British and Americans. And this goes to the heart of Anthony Sutton's book of the matching of those two people to fund the Bolshevik Revolution, which happens right after that, to fund FDR, to fund Hitler. Pilgrim Society is pivotal to everything. So this guy is not only just a bonesman, but he is in the Pilgrim Society as well. So it's a big, big deal.
Yeah, and we should do a full episode to Pilgrim Society. There's enough worth talking about there.
Yes, absolutely.
So are we? We've gotten covered everything on Mr. Depew.
Yes.
All right, I'm glad you brought him to my attention because it's the point about the railroad attorney matters. And you see, a lot of these families that are in Skull and Bones, they're some of the oldest families in America and definitely the wealthiest. They really made their money in the railroad and steel trades. The robber barons just made out like bandits with this, what they call the American system that Hamilton proposed and Lincoln implemented. And they've basically cemented their power for generations. And we see them today.
And you find them everywhere in Operation Gladio because they exported exactly what they did here, other places. That's what happened in Latin America, where they would go in and they'd promise the government that they're going to build a massive railroad system when they only built it from the port that they created to their plantation that they enslaved the people on and nowhere else in the country, because by that time they owned the country. And so the railroad is pivotal to everything that we talk about. So, okay, we can move on.
Yeah, but we'll be talking about the railroad discussion throughout because it keeps popping up. Let's be sure. Where's my next bonesman? Hang on. Yeah, here's the one I want to do. I did Russell Davenport. That was the last one we ended on. Okay, here we go. We're in 1920, bonesman David Sinton Ingalls, spelled Ingalls. And he's a bonesman named 1920. Of course, his mother was the niece of William Howard Taft, a bonesman, because of course he was. He's the grandson of a guy named Merville Ingalls, who's Harvard Law and the president of what's called Big Four Railroad. And that's another railroad connection. He's the great grandson of the guy, his namesake, a guy by the name of David Sinton. Sinton, Sinton. And Sinton, he's an Irish-born industrialist, comes to America in 1811 and became one of the wealthiest people in America. Well, it's how he made his money that's kind of interesting. He would stockpile what's known as pig iron. And he's waiting for the Civil War to break out. And once it breaks out, he gets to sell it to the government at inflated prices. So,
he knew it was going to happen?
Sure.
Oh, that's interesting.
Do I have that book right here? Yeah, I do. Fantastic book called The Election of 1860 by Michael F. Holt. And he talks about the different factions. There were four major factions in 1860, the year Lincoln gets elected. And the other three all knew that Lincoln's election would result in civil war. I mean, that was just known if the Republicans did that. So, all right, what else do we have on him? I gave you the Taft connection. David Sinton's only surviving daughter married Charles Phelps Taft, and then it was the Sinton money that financed Taft's presidential bid, which is interesting. So we've got the Taft connections again. So David Sinton Ingalls marries a woman named Louise Hale Harkness, and she's the daughter of a guy named William L. Harkness, who went to Yale, but we don't have him in the Skull and Bones. She's the granddaughter of a guy by the name of Daniel M. Harkness. And he and his half-brother, Henry M. Flager, were two of the 5 original founding partners of Standard Oil, partners with the Rockefellers.
Holy moly.
Yeah. All right. So, Mr. Ingalls.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah.
I just looked down here. That's the half-brother of Flagler.
Yeah.
Henry Flagler, which Flagler County here in Florida. That's a big, big deal.
Yeah. Well, that's a lot of money. And
that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
Okay. Keep going.
So he goes to school, private school in New Hampshire, of course.
Of course.
And last week we talked about F. Truby Davison, who started the first Yale flying unit to prepare pilots for World War I. This guy was one of them. And that would kind of take him into his career. So he gets to World War I. Before he's in Skull and Bones, he actually went back to Yale. We got in Skull and Bones. He was a little bit older, but he was a lieutenant, got to Paris in 1917. He was attached to a Royal Air Force squadron. And the guy would end up a storied career. He became an ace, shot down 6 enemy aircraft. So he's one of our very first aces we ever had. And he ended up with both a Distinguished Services Medal from the Navy and a British Distinguished Flying Cross. So, very decorated aviator. Comes back from World War I, gets his Skull and Bones tap, goes to law school, guess where? Harvard, of course.
Of course.
He's from Ohio, so he sits on the Ohio connection again. Of course, with the Taft, that was going to happen. He's in the Ohio House of Representatives for a few years. He applies for a job as the Assistant Secretary of the Navy. And a guy by the name of Admiral Jack Towers recommended him. And there was a friend of his father named Newton Banker, who was the Secretary of War from 1916 to 21, big name, friends with his father, recommends him to Hoover. So Hoover gives him the job, and this guy becomes really good friends with Hoover to the degree that he would often visit the White House with F. Truby Davison and Hoover. And these guys were 3 buddies. This is the guy that pushed for the fully deployable carrier task force. So our aircraft carriers, this guy had a lot to do with it. So we get to 1941. You're going to love this. He becomes the vice president of a company called Pan Am Air Ferries.
What?
Yep. Because of course he did.
What?
Why is that significant, Colonel?
Because Pan Am was the Air America before the CIA. Yeah, Pan Am was the airline that the oligarchs and the government used for intelligence missions. That's crazy.
Absolutely. So I knew you were going to like that one. All right, so after Pearl Harbor, he comes back, and he actually became the commander of the Pearl Harbor Naval Air Station during World War II. Then he becomes the director of Pan Am World Airways.
Wait a minute. When was he at Pearl Harbor?
Right after Pearl Harbor, after the attack, during World War II, he would become the commander of the Naval Air Station.
Do we know when he got there? Like how close?
I didn't have that in my notes, so I don't know. Okay. I'm sure we can find that out.
Okay. Yeah, because that's actually very interesting because you would need somebody like him to cover up all the evidence there.
1952, we talked last week about Senator Robert A. Taft, ran for the Republican nomination. Well, this was his campaign manager.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And in 54, he becomes the president of Cincinnati Times-Star and the vice chairman of the Taft Broadcasting Company, now defunct. Last little note on him is he's lifelong friends with Charles Lindbergh, the other great aviator.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah. So that's an interesting Skull and Bones chapter.
Yeah, it says that he was a member of the Jekyll Island Club. He was a Freemason. I do find it interesting also that he was in the American Legion, because back then the American Legion was something very different than it is today. The American Legion was a hotbed of these kind of people. That's the group that approaches Smedley Butler to basically coup the government during FDR's reign, but not in the way most people think. So his affiliation with the American Legion back then is also very interesting.
Very good catch. SR 711966 says talks about the HBO series, The Gilded Age covers this. I love that series. They did a really good, accurate job, and that just demonstrates the class system that developed here. We're not supposed to have that in America, but apparently we do now.
Yeah. Oh, Renee said it was her that told me about Tucker's dad. Thank you, Renee, for doing that, and thank you for putting your hand up. I appreciate it.
All right, next bonesman. That's an interesting one. Got the name of Charles Merville Spofford, Spofford, bonesman, 1924. He's from Evanston, Illinois, graduates from Yale, and goes to law school. Guess where?
Harvard?
Yeah, imagine that. It's almost like there's a pipeline.
Almost.
And this guy would marry a woman named Margaret Mercer Walker.
What?
I don't have the direct lineage, whether she's one of the Walkers, but she certainly comes from the right part of the country and the right kind of family.
Yeah.
Yeah. I couldn't make the direct connection, but I assume I'm thinking it's there. So I bring up Spofford. He's been very interesting. He's not that dramatic of a guy, besides his connections that show everything else. But in 1930, he joins the law firm of Davis Polk and Wardwell, normally known today as Davis Polk. And these guys are everywhere. This is one of the biggest, most influential law firms in the world. And here's a bonesman joining them at a young age. So Davis Polk has a long and storied history. They were the chief counsel for James Pierpont Morgan, J.P. Morgan himself. These are the guys that helped restructure the Pennsylvania Railroad. They helped create General Electric. It's a pretty big law firm. When Grover Cleveland lost his re-election bid, waited 4 years, and then got reelected, just like Trump just did, the 4 years in between Grover Cleveland worked for Davis Polk as a lawyer. So,
well, that's interesting.
So fast forward into a little more recently, Davis Polk is still in the news 100 century plus later. During the financial crisis in 2008-9, some of their clients included, the U.S. Treasury Department, Federal Reserve Bank of New York, AIG, defunct. Freddie Mac should be defunct. Lehman Brothers, bankrupt. Citigroup should have gone bankrupt. That's this law firm, Davis Polk.
So that's actually really, really interesting because that's literally the who's who of the corrupt money laundering operations in legitimate banks. Wow.
Yeah. Well, these guys also helped draft the Dodd-Frank Act, which was absolutely financial grift. That thing needs to be repealed yesterday.
Yeah.
I was working for Wall Street when that came out, and I read the whole thing. It was just, what was his name? Barney Frank, Christopher Dodd, two of the worst senators ever.
Absolutely.
So you remember earlier, last year, you had all this pro-Gaza protests at law schools and universities. That was put to an end, but Davis Polk was the lead law firm that wrote the letter telling the law school deans that if you keep targeting Jewish students, it's going to have hiring consequences. So that's the kind of muscle they flex because they put an end to it immediately. All right, so more on Davis Polk because it's worth it because, we talk about all these spider webs. Their alumni are all over the Washington, D.C. bureaucracy. They had one of their people was on Mueller's special counsel team. That was someone named Uzo Azanye. They've got, FTC chair John Leibowitz. They've had 3 chairmen of the Securities and Exchange Commission, including Gary Lynch, who represented Morgan Stanley, Credit Suisse, B of A.
More money launderers.
Kirsten Gillibrand comes from this firm. Jerome Powell, current chairman of the Federal Reserve, comes from this firm. The head of the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation, former Secretary of the Treasury, Ogden Livingston Mills, There's another alumni, Eli Whitney Debevoise of the Whitney family that we've talked about weeks ago. Here's another alumni, Robert Harrison, who just happened to be the CEO of the Clinton Global Initiative. They have one of their alumni is the CEO of Thomson Reuters, a guy by the name of Tom Glosser.
Holy crap.
Mm-hmm. Another one of their lawyers, Louis B. Caden, he worked for RFK, Bobby, before he got shot. And he became the vice chair of my former employer, once again, Citigroup. It gets better with this law firm. It's worth talking about. We got Charles Lee, and all he did was he was the former CEO of the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. You have David Schwimmer, who's the CEO of the London Stock Exchange. Another alumni is Francis Lind Statz. Let's go back to that. These guys are running the SEC, the stock exchanges all around the world. This is one.
I was waiting for you to say that because they're in that is the financial web. I was waiting for you to go, see?
Mm-hmm.
All you have to do, they're all alumni of one particular law firm with some bonesmen embedded in there. So all you have to do is make a phone call and it goes out across the wave.
And they run the regulators, and they can regulate everybody but their best friends. You know, it's a rigged game, people. It's the reason I left Wall Street in 2009. I couldn't stand the stench.
It is a rigged game.
All right. That was another guy, Francis Lynn Statson. He's a personal attorney for J.P. Morgan also, and the president of the New York State Bar Association. And my favorite and final alumni of that law firm is former Democrat presidential candidate Andrew Yang.
What?
Yeah.
Huh.
So what else did Mr. Spofford do besides work for the law firm? So he joins the Army for World War II and rose to the rank of Brigadier General, which of course happens when you're a bonesman. Because of his financial background and his ability to speak French, because of his cultured background, he gets assigned to Allied Force Headquarters in Algiers. And what's going on in Algiers in 1943?
Well, there's a big push from the Algerians themselves for freedom. Mm-hmm. And they begin basically a civil war to kick the French out.
Yeah, he's there for that. Then he becomes, later in the war, becomes chief of staff for the Allied military government and deputy chief of civil affairs for Sicily and Italy.
And what would be important about that in relation to Operation Gladio and the use of the mob in order to do the landing at Sicily in order to be able to take the country of Italy away from Mussolini?
Yep, that's why I put that in the notes. I knew you'd catch that one. I think that's funny being stationed there. The people that he got to deal with, some of them, I guess, most difficult to deal with generals in history. We had Patton, Montgomery, and de Gaulle all in the same place, and this guy gets to deal with them. So,
but do you know what's really interesting about that is if you go back and look at what happened to Patton, and then of course they try to assassinate Charles de Gaulle over 20 times once he becomes the president of France, it does seem a little odd, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's interesting. This guy finishes up his career in 1950 to 52. He's a NATO rep for the North Atlantic Council, and he's the chair of the European Coordinating Committee. And I don't know what they do, but we can guess. So
wait a minute. He was at NATO at the beginning of Operation Gladio?
1950 to 52.
When they were setting up all of the European Gladio units out of NATO?
That's just a coincidence, Colonel.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So there's a fun bonesman for you.
Yes.
So what is that? Like the 30th example we've given that show that this is how the world really works?
Yes.
Can it be? I mean, JFK knew it. All right. Next bonesman is a James Jeremiah Wadsworth. Bonesman, 1927. Really old family. His great-grandfather was James Wadsworth. He's a Union general in the Civil War who died at the Battle of the Wilderness. So World War hero, Civil War hero. Both his grandfather, James Wolcott Wadsworth, and his father, James Wolcott Wadsworth Jr., were served in the House of Representatives for the state of New York. They were both in Congress. So we've got a little bit of royalty going on here. His other grandfather is interesting. It was a guy by the name of John Hay, who was the U.S. Secretary of State from 1898 to 1905. So what's special about 1898?
1898.
Spanish-American War.
Oh,
Also,
yeah,
when we invade Hawaii. Of course, I've talked all the time about how Sullivan and Cromwell's the law firm that did all the intel work for both of those events. And John Hay is the Secretary of State when this war breaks out. Yes,
the Philippines, Colombia, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, everything.
What did I have? Something else interesting on him. Okay. John Hay previously had been the private secretary and the biographer of Abraham Lincoln. So think about this. He worked for two presidents that both got assassinated, Lincoln and McKinley. It's interesting. He would also be. Go ahead.
Sorry.
I was going to say he also had another stint as the U.S. ambassador, the ambassador to the United Kingdom. So that was Mr. John Hay.
Wait a second. Wait just a second. This guy was medically unfit for World War II because of an injured leg and ends up as a manager at Curtiss-Wright Corporation. And this says it was headquartered in frickin' Buffalo, New York. Are you kidding me? I didn't know that. I didn't know Curtiss Aircraft was headquartered in Buffalo. Curtiss Aircraft is the company that William Pauly has the franchise in Southeast Asia that built the aircraft to use for the ferrying around of all the opium. Oh my God, my head's just blowing up right now.
Well, that's Mr. James Jeremiah Wadsworth for you. And this guy descends from American royalty.
Oh, that makes so much more sense. So Curtiss Aircraft gets the contract given to William Pauly to build all of the aircraft that we're going to buy to put Chiang Kai-shek as the world, and it happens to reside in fucking William Donovan's backyard in Buffalo. Oh my gosh, my head's just blowing up right now.
This is so much fun.
Oh, holy crap.
Right, let's go on with Wadsworth. There's more stuff. There's more fun stuff today.
Okay.
All right, so Mr. Wadsworth, from 1953 to 1960, he's the deputy chief to the U.S. delegation to the United Nations. It's a pretty important position, but you see it's how these people with all the old bloodlines are the ones who get all these diplomatic positions. Yeah, that's how they run the world.
And especially at that time, because it was new. They were just formulating all of the committees and what they were going to do and everything. I mean, relatively new.
Yeah, and the people they're meeting at the United Nations, once again, a Rockefeller brainchild. People they're meeting with are basically the royalty of every other country in the world. They're muckety mucks. You just don't get that appointment unless you are connected and they know you can be trusted somehow.
Yes.
To play this great global Game of Thrones.
Yes.
People try to say, whatever, Rothschilds rule the world. No, they do not. They're a major player at one point in time. But there are so many different, moneyed interests throughout the world, and they all play this game of cards. And most of the people calling the shots sit in smoke-filled rooms in London, New York, Washington, D.C., and New York. And that's basically the way, there's some other power centers in Europe and Asia, what have you, but they all play the same game. And they tell us about a democracy. No. I've had enough of that. Becomes full ambassador to the UN in 1960 to 61, and then Lyndon Johnson would appoint him to be the head of the FCC in 1965. But interesting career for Mr. James Jeremiah Wadsworth. Okay. I think my voice can hold out for one more fun person. Because we're up to 1931, and the name that jumps off. Oh, before I go on to that, there's some people in the 20s that we also talked about earlier, and just to give them a shout out. Since we already talked about, I'm not going to do it again, but a lot of these people were classmates of George Herbert Walker Jr., who was 1927. John Rockefeller Prentice was 1928. We've talked about them already, and yeah, we already hit on Davenport. We did that last week. So yeah, that's most of the 20s we've got. So I'm going to get to 1930s when we have a bonesman by the name of H.J. Heinz II, Henry John Heinz.
Okay.
All right, it's a big one. There's a lot of Heinz connections coming here.
Okay.
So he's a bonesman class in 1931. His grandfather was Henry J. Heinz, who founded the H.J. Heinz Company, which based out of Pittsburgh. This is the Heinz are Pittsburgh royalty. And of course, Heinz, it's grown to become the 5th largest food company in the world. Our grandpa, Henry J. Heinz, started was with a partner, and they were making horseradish. And after a couple of years, that went bankrupt. He was using his grandmother's horseradish recipe. And then he started the new Heinz Company with ketchup. And it just grew from there. So that's grandfather, the founder of the Heinz fortune. Moving on to H.J. Heinz, 1931 bonesman. He would marry a woman named Joan Deal, and they would establish their home right outside of Pittsburgh, and they called it Rosemont Farm. Now, it's an important name. Remember Rosemont, because we're going to get back to it later. H.J. Heinz II would become the president of the Heinz Company in 1941, and he would make 5 trips to London during World War II. The first one was to inspect the Heinz building that had just gotten bombed. And the other 4, he started getting involved in diplomacy and helping Europe, because he runs a food company, he's helping deal with food shortages. Okay. So he's getting involved in diplomatic stuff. He'd be the guy who grew the Heinz Company by acquiring both Starkist Foods. Remember Starkist tuna? That's a Heinz product. And also Ore-Ida Foods. So all your potato chips, I think. Eisenhower then taps him to head a special mission to check the effectiveness of the economic aid program to Pakistan. I believe that's it's Eisenhower, so it's got to be 1950s.
So he also went to Oxford, right?
I believe, yeah.
Okay, well, there's also the correlation, right? Because Oxford is the grooming place for MI6 in the induction into the CIA kind of world. That's a connection. Go ahead.
Oh, that's good. I'm glad you caught that. I did have the Oxford thing there, and I forgot to mention. So good job. What's going on in Pakistan in the 1950s?
Lots of stuff.
And he's there checking on the effectiveness of the economic aid program. We know what American aid is. It is a cover for I don't even know what term I want to use for it. Shenanigans.
Regime change. Control.
Yeah. So that's what this guy's doing. He's definitely knee-deep in this stuff. He's the chair of the U.S. delegation for the Economic Commission for Europe in 1958 and 59. And of course, he is the member of the steering committee of the Bilderberg Group.
Okay.
All right, so that's enough for him. He's just a businessman, right? No, come on.
But he also opened subsidiaries in the Netherlands, Portugal, Venezuela, Japan, and Italy. Right? So if you think about that, Portugal at the time is a fascist country. It is being ran by a dictator for the purpose of being able to exploit the country to do exactly this. Okay? Venezuela basically had been ruled because of their oil by the United States. Italy was under Operation Gladio, we controlled the government there. NATO did. And the same thing with Japan. Japan is what gave birth to the World Anti-Communist League with the two World War II war criminals. They give the okay of any foreign business that comes into Japan. So him opening subsidies or subsidiaries in those countries is huge.
Yeah, and what's interesting is think about this. With the Heinz family fortune, what they make their money in, it's an international food processing company or food manufacturer. And what does the major thing of regime changes do? It's they go to third world countries because we want their cheap resources and cheap labor.
Yes.
And that's got to be paramount to the profitability of an international food company.
Yes.
So this guy has, regime change written all over him.
Yeah, so he's inserting. So here's the tip of the spear, Gladio, regime change, and he's right behind with his company exploiting the new market.
Yeah, it's basically the United Fruit story. It's identical, which of course is the DuPonts.
Oh, crap.
Right.
Hold on. Sorry. Don't mean to steal the show, but it says here, are you going to talk about him teaming up with Mellon?
Go for it. I was going to skip over it, but go ahead.
Oh my God. Okay. Where's my book? Oh, it's in the other room. We just discovered yesterday in our beginning of a new book, in the 4 o'clock segment of the Mellons being involved in the LSD production and the Profumo affair. And they're involved in all of the crap in Operation Gladio. So holy moly. This is so crazy.
Well, what's interesting is Heinz is from Pittsburgh. Carnegie is from Pittsburgh. We have the Carnegie-Mellon connection.
Yes.
So we've got a Pittsburgh racket going on here.
Yeah, because they were involved in aluminum. And so a lot of the places, Alcoa, a lot of the Operation Gladio was to exploit the mining capabilities in some of these third world countries. So, holy crap, my head's spinning. Keep going.
All right. I'm going to move on to his son. Was a guy by the name of John Heinz. He went to Yale, but I do not have a record of him being skull and bones. He would then go on to Harvard Business School. In 1963, he joins the U.S. Air Force Reserves. And I do not see that he served in Vietnam. It's interesting to me because my father was a pilot for the Air Force, and some of the years that overlap that. So I hope they never met. So he gets at a pretty young age. He gets elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 1971 and serves from Pennsylvania till 1977. He gets elected to the U.S. Senate in 1977, and he serves until 1991. When he ran for the Senate, it was interesting. We'd just gotten a Supreme Court case called Buckley v. Vallejo, which allowed a candidate to spend unlimited amount of money on their own campaign. And of course, when you're the heir to the Heinz fortune, that's going to be kind of a good thing. So he managed to get in trouble because he accepted $6,000 illegal donations from an entity known as Gulf Oil.
Of course he did.
And who's Gulf Oil? And why have they popped up on our radar so often?
Oh my gosh.
Mm-hmm. So John Heinz actually dies in a plane crash in 1991.
Yes, he did.
But it's interesting. The plane crash is when a helicopter crashed into an airplane, as we just saw.
Imagine that.
Yeah. Well, this one is a really dumb story. He's on board with like 6 other people, including 2 kids. They're in a small Piper Aerostar, and they're having landing gear problems. So it's a tiny plane. This helicopter gets up there, tries to observe the landing gear to see if they can help it, and they got too close. They collided, and everyone dies. That was a Bell 412 helicopter.
But there are people who believe that was not an accident.
Okay, so now he's dead. His widow is someone by the name of Teresa Heinz.
And where's she from?
Originally?
Yeah.
Oh, should I have that?
Portugal.
Yeah. Well, no, she's Portuguese, but she grew up in what became Mozambique,
Yes.
Africa.
Yes.
So this is, we've all heard of Teresa Heinz because she then goes on to marry former presidential candidate John Kerry.
Yes.
John Kerry, we'll talk about more later because he was Skull and Bones, class of 1967.
Yes. And are you going to mention that they're actually related to Donald Trump?
I didn't know that.
They are.
The Heinzes or the Kerrys?
The Heinzes.
No, I didn't have that.
Yeah. It says that if you go back to Henry J. Heinz, and we're talking about John Heinz being the great grandson, but Frederick Trump was a second cousin to Henry Heinz. And that's, Frederick Trump is the paternal grandfather of Donald Trump. And he was cousins with the Heinz family.
Outstanding. So it's kind of interesting how John Kerry and Teresa Heinz met. Their first meeting was an Earth Day rally in 1990. Then her husband dies. In 1992, they meet again at the big Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, and then be married like 3 years later. Teresa and John Heinz had one child, and that was they had 3 children, one of which is important. And he's been in the news the last few years, a guy by the name of Christopher Heinz. So he went to Yale. We don't know. I think he's born like in 1972, so he would have been like 1992 when he was in college. We don't know if he was Skull and Bones because that's kind of where the list cuts off. But that's Christopher Heinz did go to Yale. He would then go to law school. Guess where? Yeah, Harvard Law.
Harvard.
Yep. He was working on his stepfather, John Kerry's presidential campaign. Christopher Heinz even spoke at the 2004 DNC, and there was talk about having him get into politics. Instead, he goes back into private practice, and he co-founds a company called Rosemont Capital. Remember Rosemont Farm is outside of Pittsburgh?
Yes.
That's what they named all these entities. And of course, his partners at Rosemont Capital and Rosemont Seneca were Hunter Biden and Devin Archer. Christopher Heinz would leave when Hunter and Devin Archer took their board positions with Burisma. He didn't want anything to do with it, which is very interesting. Yeah. I have a feeling we're going to see Christopher Heinz testifying sometime in the near future. My last interesting thing about Christopher Heinz is, of course, he was a member of the Council of Foreign Relations.
So I'm going to add a couple of things about Teresa Heinz. The Mozambique part is very important because she was living there because at the time it was a Portuguese colony. Okay, so again, this goes back to was many of the other Operation Gladio events that we've covered in Africa were also Portuguese colonies or French colonies or Belgian colonies. And so she is among the elite that are living as the royalty, if you will, among African countries that are being exploited by the West. And so that's the lifestyle in which she was born into. And that's the lifestyle that she lived. And her family is both from the UK and Portugal. So she has a lot of different interesting connections to, says that she also earned a degree in apartheid South Africa. So, just so you know who she is.
Wasn't just some gal he met at a bar, huh?
No.
Well, that's all I brought today.
Okay.
We went a little more quickly than I expected, but
That's fine. I think that was an awesome show. I think it, again, you blew my mind today. I've been riding kind of right along with you, but today was a showstopper for me. That was another piece of the whole Buffalo puzzle in the Curtiss aircraft and Wild Bill Donovan. That just like totally blew my mind. So,
well, if you go back to the 1800s and you look at all these towns, the industrial towns that built up, Buffalo, Erie, New York, we were talking about Cincinnati, Ohio. We've talked about Pittsburgh. Well, all of these industrial giants, basically, this is where the robber barons made their fortune, and they did it with an awful lot of government handouts. I mean, this was the political debate of the 1800s, and that's what decided that 1860 election that completely changed us from a union of sovereign states into a national republic, and that's not what we're supposed to be. And the bigger the government gets, the more handouts they can give, and that's why what we're seeing today is so amazing. We're unwinding 150 plus years of graft and grift. And these are the people pulling those strings. These elite, super class, villains. And they've been running the government, and they're both Republicans and Democrats. It is absolutely bipartisan.
It really could not be more timely, Warhamster. I'm so glad that you, number one, I'm glad you picked me, but I'm glad that we are doing this together because it could not be more timely.
Well, there's not a better person to be my co-pilot on this. I mean, we're just totally complimentary. So
yes, yeah, I agree.
And we also have a lot of other great researchers that help us out.
Oh, like Renee. I mean, SR71. He's all over all of this. He helps me every day at 4:00 posting stuff. Stellar, I see her there. I couldn't do without all of these guys. That's 100% true. So we are very, very lucky to be doing this, not only together, but with all of these other wonderful patriots with us. Okay, so I do want to just go over a couple of things. We are going to do the 4:00 show. I have a 15-minute kind of teaser that I'm going to film. I don't know when it will be released with JJ Carroll at 6:15-ish. And then I will be appearing at 7 p.m. Eastern time on the 302 File podcast. I reposted a link to that announcement earlier this morning. Do you have any other shows coming up, Warhamster?
Yeah, the one we had to postpone yesterday because my voice. We're going to try to get out tomorrow, and that's it's one of my Federalist Report series. We're going to be starting the Confederate Constitution. And we're going to go into, what was the thinkings from a constitutional standpoint of, the founders of the Confederate Constitution. And, so we're going to have to go do a little bit of the history and the build up to the Civil War. When you start going through the Confederate Constitution, it's going to change your mind about what those people, what their primary concerns were. Because they had 80 years of the U.S. Constitution to learn from. And they said, okay, we didn't quite get this right. And it's actually there's an argument to be made that it's a superior document to the U.S. Constitution in many ways. Not all. And we're just going to go through that. And that's going to be a multi-week series. And I'll be doing that with Douglas V. Gibbs and Ron Partain.
That's awesome. Yeah, our buddy Ron, he comes on the 4:00 show a lot. So that's going to be an awesome series. I hope everybody tunes in for that.
Yeah, it's going to be really challenging hosting it because Ron's like a little kid at Christmas on this. It's hard enough with Doug because Doug's got everything about the constitutional history memorized, and he'll go on a 10-minute rant, which is great when he's teaching class. But when you're trying to do a show, it's hard. And I got Ron on the other side, and he's like a little kid at Christmas. This is one of his favorite topics. So this is going to be it'll be hurting
cats?
It'll be hurting cats. But hopefully,
and you're going to be the referee. Ding, 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 ding.
What I need to do is I need to get over to the toy store and buy one of those Fisher Price toys.
Yes. Yes.
I'm going to order one of those.
Or maybe just a bell. All right, time out. You need to go to your corner.
Just get a mute button. Push.
I think it comes with that.
All right.
All right.
Anyway, thanks for having me on, and my voice actually made it through.
And thank you for coming, not feeling 100%. I appreciate it. And so does our audience. So until next Thursday at noon, you guys have a nice weekend. And hopefully I'll see you this evening or at 4 o'clock.
Cheers,
Thank you.
everyone.